You think forgiveness means letting them win. But what if the real loss has been every breath you've taken since it happened? What if the anger you call strength is the very spell keeping you trapped? There's a quiet violence in remembering. Not the memory itself, but the way it repeats without your permission, tightening your body as if the past still has hands. Somewhere along the way, your inner world learned a lie. That holding on keeps you safe, that release is betrayal, that peace is weakness. So the wound stays alert, loyal to an old moment that no longer exists, except in you. This is the hidden law no one warned you about. The subconscious doesn't punish to protect. It preserves to survive. And every time you replay the story, it obeys. Not because it's cruel, but because it's faithful. Faithful to what you've impressed upon it. The question isn't whether you remember what happened. The question is, why is it still happening now? At some point, resentment stopped being something you felt and became something you were. It slipped into your posture, into the way you tell the story, into the way your voice tightens when certain names pass through the air. You don't call it resentment, of course. You call it memory. You call it justice. You call it not being stupid again. But listen carefully, because this is where the contradiction begins to breathe. If the pain were only about what happened back then, it would have softened by now. Time dulls even the sharpest blade. But this pain hasn't dulled. It has rehearsed. It has sharpened itself through repetition. It has stayed alive because something in you keeps feeding it, quietly, loyally, almost lovingly. And that's the shocking part. The injury didn't just wound you, it recruited you. Somewhere in the aftermath, when your chest was still tight, when your thoughts were still loud, you made an unconscious vow, not with words, but with emotion. Never again. I will remember this forever. I will stay alert. And the subconscious listened. It mistook your pain for instruction. Now resentment wears the mask of protection. It tells you it's standing guard, that if you let go, something worse will happen. That forgiveness is a moral failure, a collapse of dignity, a rewriting of truth. So you hold the wound like a badge. Because if you release it, who are you without it? That's the question no one asks out loud. You tell yourself you're strong for carrying it. You tell yourself you're right. You tell yourself you've earned the right to feel this way. And morally, perhaps you have. But energetically, something else is happening. Every time the memory rises, your body reacts as if the danger is present now. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, the nervous system sounds an alarm that never turns off, and the subconscious, obedient, innocent, precise, records the signal again, still happening, still unsafe, still unresolved. You don't notice the cost at first, it's subtle, a background tension, a low-grade exhaustion, a sense that joy must be monitored, that peace must be justified. Because a part of you believes that if you stop remembering, you'll be unprotected. And so the injury becomes an identity. Not because you want it to, but because letting it go feels like stepping into the dark without armor. Here is the quiet, unbearable truth most people never see. You are not loyal to the person who hurt you. You are loyal to the version of yourself who survived. And that loyalty is killing something inside you. The subconscious does not understand time the way you do. It does not know then and now. It knows impression. It knows emotion. It knows what is repeated with feeling. So when you replay the moment, when you relive the words, the betrayal, the shock, you are not remembering, you are rehearsing, and rehearsal is instruction. This is why it feels so morally confusing. On the surface, you are justified. Anyone listening to your story would nod in agreement. They would say, "Of course you feel that way." They would validate the pain. But beneath that validation, something collapses quietly. Because while your conscious mind argues the case, your subconscious is building a home inside the injury. It decorates it with familiarity. It reinforces it with repetition. It protects it with fear. And soon peace begins to feel foreign, suspicious, almost dangerous. Have you noticed that? That strange discomfort when things are calm, that subtle urge to revisit the story just to make sure it still hurts the same way. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. Resentment promises freedom, but delivers imprisonment. It tells you, I am your strength. But it drains your energy, narrows your future, and anchors you to a moment that no longer exists anywhere except inside your nervous system. And here's the most unbelievable part. The subconscious doesn't care who was right. It only cares about what is alive. So the paradox deepens. You stand morally upright, while energetically bound. You tell yourself you've moved on, yet your body flinches at shadows. You tell yourself you're healed, yet the memory still has a pulse. You tell yourself forgiveness is for them, not for you. And still, the past breathes through you, not because you're broken, not because you're weak, but because something in you learned that pain equals safety. And the subconscious, faithful servant that it is, refuses to let go of what you've taught it to preserve. There is a law operating beneath your thoughts, quiet, precise, and utterly indifferent to your opinions about it. It does not ask whether you deserve peace. It does not weigh morality. It does not consider context, history, or justification. It listens. That is all it does. The subconscious is not a judge. It is a recorder, a mirror, a vast inner field that takes emotional frequency and turns it into form. Whatever is impressed upon it with repetition and feeling, it accepts as truth, not symbolic truth, not philosophical truth, but instructional truth. This is where the betrayal of old beliefs begins. You were taught that thoughts create reality, but that is only partially true. Thoughts without emotion are whispers. Emotion without repetition is static. But emotion repeated, emotion revisited, emotion relived, that becomes a command. Picture it like this. Every time you return to the memory with the same tight chest, the same surge of anger, the same inner dialogue, you are pressing a seal into warm wax. Again and again and again. The subconscious does not argue. It does not resist. It does not say, this is outdated. It says, understood. And then it organizes your inner world around that signal. This is why certain patterns repeat with an almost supernatural precision. Why similar situations seem to find you. Why the same emotional wounds wear different faces, but cut in the same place. It isn't fate. It isn't punishment. It isn't bad luck. It is echo. An echo doesn't know it's an echo. It simply returns what was sent. And unforgiven memory, charged with emotion, does not stay in the past. It becomes a living signal broadcast inward, a frequency the subconscious takes as current reality. This is the hidden law Joseph Murphy spoke around, but few truly felt. The subconscious accepts what you feel is true, not what you wish were true. So when you say, I forgive, but feel the surge return, the subconscious listens to the surge. When you say, I'm over it, but replay the scene, the subconscious listens to the replay. When you say, I want peace, but revisit the wound for safety, the subconscious listens to the wound. It is faithful to a fault. And that faithfulness is both terrifying and sacred. Think of the subconscious as soil. It does not choose what grows. It responds to what is planted and watered. Every remembered injury is a seed. Every emotional replay is water. And the garden does not care who planted the seed. It only grows what is nurtured. This is where the awe enters, and the quiet horror. Because it means the suffering that persists is not maintained by the past, but by the present relationship with the past. Not consciously, not intentionally, but rhythmically. The subconscious learns through rhythm, through cycles, through what is returned to again and again with feeling. It reads imagery as instruction. It reads emotion as law. And unforgiven memory is vivid. It has faces, voices, textures, tones. It has weight. So the subconscious treats it as now. This is why time alone does not heal. This is why talking about it sometimes makes it worse. This is why insight without embodiment changes nothing. Because the law is not intellectual, it is energetic. The subconscious does not hear words, it hears states. And here is the unbearable contradiction. You are not being punished for refusing to forgive. You are being obeyed. The subconscious is not asking you to let go. It is asking you to be precise. Because whatever you hold with emotional authority, whatever you revisit with intensity, becomes instruction. And until that instruction changes, The echo continues, not loudly, not dramatically, but faithfully, like a shadow that never leaves because the light never shifts. And the most unsettling realization of all begins to stir. If the subconscious is this loyal, if it mirrors without judgment, if it preserves whatever is impressed upon it, then forgiveness is not about them. It is not about excusing. It is not about forgetting. It is not about moral superiority. It is about withdrawing the signal. But that understanding is still too raw, too close, too dangerous to touch yet. Because if this law is real, then something inside you has been listening the entire time, and it is listening now. If this reached you, not as an idea, but as something ancient shifting inside your chest, pause here for a moment. Do not move forward yet, because this moment is not neutral. What you are feeling is not curiosity, it is recognition. There is something unsettling about realizing that what has been hurting you for so long is not being held in place by the past, but by the quiet loyalty of something inside you that never stopped listening. And when this kind of realization appears, it asks for a gesture. Not for the platform, not for the channel, but for your own inner system. If this is hitting somewhere deep, if you feel that something has been named without being explained, take a moment now and act with intention. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below. It does not need to be eloquent. It can be a single word, a symbol. I felt this. I'm here. Not as a habit, not as a reflex, but as an energetic declaration. Because the subconscious learns through signal, through repetition, through emotionally charged gestures. When you do this consciously, you are not supporting content. You are telling your inner world, I am listening. I recognize this frequency. I allow this to continue. Say it out loud if you can, or feel it silently. Small acts, when done with presence, are not small. They inform the subconscious that something new is being recorded now, and it always listens. There is a misunderstanding so deep that it has survived centuries of spiritual language. Forgiveness is not an act of kindness. It is not generosity. It is not virtue. Forgiveness is withdrawal, withdrawal of emotional energy, withdrawal of identification, withdrawal of the signal that has been feeding the echo. And this is where resistance rises, because a part of you still believes that if you stop feeding the memory, you are saying it didn't matter, that it was acceptable, that it did not wound you. That belief is the last defense of the wound. But the subconscious does not interpret forgiveness as morality. It interprets it as change in feeling. This is why effort has never worked. You tried to forgive with words. You tried to forgive with logic. You tried to forgive by understanding their story, their trauma, their limitations. And nothing changed, because the law is not impressed by explanation. It is impressed by state. Here is the subtle shift, so subtle it almost feels disappointing. Forgiveness is not something you do. It is something you stop doing. You stop sending emotional voltage into the image. You stop rehearsing the charge. You stop revisiting the scene with authority. Not by force. Not by suppression, but by withdrawing permission. Imagine the memory as a stage that has been lit for years. Every time you return to it, the lights turn on automatically. The actors know their lines. Your body knows when to tense. Your breath knows when to shorten. Forgiveness is not dragging the actors off the stage, it is turning off the lights. And at first, the darkness feels dangerous, because the subconscious has learned that illumination equals safety, that vigilance equals survival, that tension equals control. So when you stop feeding the scene with emotion, the system panics. This is why forgiveness feels like loss before it feels like relief. You are not losing truth, you are losing familiar pain, and the subconscious resists unfamiliar peace more than familiar suffering. Here is the method, if it can be called that. Though it is more of an inner orientation than a technique, you do not revisit the memory to change it. You do not revisit it to understand it. You do not revisit it to release it. You revisit your relationship to the feeling. When the image appears, and it will, you do not argue with it. You do not analyze it. You do not push it away. You simply remove the emotional fuel. You let the image exist without commentary, without tension, without narrative. This feels unnatural at first, like leaving a door unlocked, like lowering a shield, but the subconscious notices immediately, because something unprecedented has happened. The image appeared, and the signal did not follow. No surge, no tightening, no rehearsal, just neutrality, or even fatigue. And neutrality is powerful. To the subconscious, neutrality is not indifference. It is new instruction. It says, this is no longer current, this is no longer urgent. This does not require preservation, but do not expect relief yet. At first, there is only quiet discomfort, a sense of emptiness, a strange absence where the pain used to live. This is not peace. This is withdrawal symptoms. The subconscious has been fed on intensity for years. When the intensity disappears, it searches for it. This is why the memory may return more frequently at first, louder, sharper, almost desperate. Not because you are failing, but because the system is checking. Is this still alive? Is this still important? Do I still need to keep this? And every time the image arrives without emotional reinforcement, something extraordinary happens beneath awareness. The groove begins to shallow. The echo weakens. Not dramatically, not heroically. Quietly. This is the part no one romanticizes. Forgiveness is boring. It lacks catharsis. It lacks fireworks. It lacks the satisfaction of moral superiority. It is the repeated choice to feel nothing special where something used to burn, and repetition is everything. Because the subconscious does not change through insight, it changes through re-impression. Each neutral encounter with the memory is a new imprint. Each calm breath in the presence of the image is a correction, not forced calm, not spiritual bypass, but the calm that comes from withholding energy. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. The image loses saturation. The voice loses authority. The body stops preparing for impact. You do not feel triumphant, you feel distant, as if the memory belongs to someone else, as if it happened in another lifetime. This is not dissociation. This is de-identification. The subconscious is learning a new law. What is not energized is not preserved. And here is the suppressed hope, so quiet it barely dares to speak. If peace can be impressed the same way pain was impressed, if calm repetition can overwrite emotional command, if the subconscious is truly faithful, then forgiveness is not erasure, it is replacement, not yet complete, not yet stable, but something has shifted direction, and the system knows it, which is why, right now, something in you feels slightly unguarded, as if the armor has loosened, but nothing terrible has happened. Not yet. At some point, quietly, without ceremony, you realize something unsettling. You are no longer standing guard. Not because the threat disappeared, not because the past apologized, not because justice was served, but because the one who needed to guard has begun to dissolve. For a long time, your identity was shaped around vigilance. You became the one who remembers, the one who doesn't forget, the one who stays sharp, alert, ready. There was pride in that. A dark pride, perhaps, but pride nonetheless. Because pain gave you definition, it gave you edges, it gave you a reason to stay tense in a world that once proved itself unsafe. But now, without announcing itself, something has shifted. The memory no longer sits at the center of the room. It's still there, but it's not in charge. And this creates a strange inner disorientation. Because if you are not the guardian of the wound, who are you? This is where identity begins to tremble. The subconscious, once trained to protect through pain, starts receiving a different authority. Not loud, not aggressive, but calm, steady, non-reactive. And calm authority is unfamiliar. It doesn't posture, it doesn't justify, it doesn't explain itself. It simply is. This version of you does not need to rehearse the past to prove strength, does not need to revisit the injury to maintain boundaries, does not need to harden to survive. That does not mean softness, it means sovereignty. Because the one who commands the subconscious is not the one who feels the most, but the one who chooses the state. And this is where the internal rupture deepens. You begin to notice moments where you could react, and you don't. Not because you are numb, but because the impulse never arrives. The familiar surge, the tightening, the inner speech, the defensive readiness fails to materialize. And in its place is something unnerving: silence. A silence that does not ask for permission, a silence that does not explain itself. This silence is not emptiness, it is authority, and authority reshapes identity from the inside out. You are no longer defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you no longer obey. The wound does not disappear, but it loses jurisdiction, and that is dangerous territory, because without the wound as compass, the future feels open, unscripted, and the subconscious, so long accustomed to instructions written in pain, hesitates. It waits. This waiting is not passive, it is alert. The subconscious is watching to see who speaks next, and for the first time, it is not the memory, not the reflex, not the inherited fear. It is you, not the reactive self, not the defensive self, but the one who understands, without thinking, that emotional energy is law. This self does not fight old patterns. It does not argue with them. It does not try to destroy them. It simply does not feed them. And that restraint, so understated, so uncelebrated, redefines power. Because power no longer comes from intensity, it comes from selectivity. You begin to feel it in small ways first. A delay between stimulus and response. A pause where there used to be a surge, a breath that arrives unforced. These moments do not feel triumphant. They feel strange, almost unreal, because for so long your sense of self was tied to reaction, to feeling strongly, to being moved, provoked, triggered. Now something else is emerging. A self that does not need to prove it remembers. A self that does not need to reenact survival. A self that trusts its ability to remain intact without constant vigilance. This is not forgiveness as virtue. This is forgiveness as authority over inner law, and authority is quiet. It does not announce transformation. It does not seek witnesses. It simply alters the rules the subconscious lives by. And the subconscious responds, not with fireworks, but with compliance. Old signals fade. New baselines establish themselves, not yet fully, not permanently, but enough to sense it. You are becoming someone who does not need the wound to feel real. And that realization is both liberating and deeply unsettling. Because if you are no longer the one who was wronged, no longer the one who endured, no longer the one who survived, then a question begins to echo in the silence. Who are you now? And the subconscious, still listening, waits for what you will impress next. Nothing ends here. There is no conclusion because nothing has finished moving. What has begun is not a thought, but a momentum. Not a decision, but a shift in signal. Somewhere beneath awareness, something is recalibrating. The subconscious is adjusting to a quieter authority, a steadier frequency, a presence that does not need to rehearse pain to remain intact. You may notice it later, unexpectedly, in a moment where you should have reacted and didn't, in a memory that passes through without gripping the body, in a silence that no longer feels empty. Do not name it yet. Naming freezes movement. Let it remain undefined, unclaimed, listening, because the field you are in now is not about answers. It is about choice before thought. The next time the memory rises, something will be different, not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Enough to know that the law is real, enough to feel that something inside you has stopped obeying the old command. And the subconscious, faithful as ever, has taken note. It is recording now, not pain, not vigilance, but absence. And absence repeated becomes space. What enters that space has not been decided yet. That is not a warning. It is an opening. And somewhere in the quiet, something ancient waits, not for forgiveness, but for what you will impress next.